Hi, I think we're going to get started in anticipation that a few people will probably trickle in. So today's panel is about flexible and atypical working. My name's Helen Colquhoun. I'm an employment lawyer at Withers. And in the interests of full disclosure, I do flexible working myself, so I'm quite an advocate of it. I work a 4-day week, in theory, and half a day of that from home. So from a personal perspective, I'm quite interested and passionate about the topic of flexible working and whether personally it works or not. And from a professional perspective, being an employment lawyer, I work a lot with senior executives and small to mid-sized companies who are grappling with flexible working, obviously coming at it from very different angles about whether to ask for it, how to make it work, is it going to work for our organisation, can we possibly introduce it, is it going to be a disaster? And so hearing both sides of the fence's perspective on that. So I was quite excited today that we've got quite a diverse panel of speakers from different organisations, different countries, different backgrounds, who are going to come at the issue of flexible working from quite different perspectives. And what I'm hoping we can talk about today is kind of sort of the good, the bad, the ugly of flexible and atypical working in terms of what other companies are doing, both globally and specifically within Hong Kong, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what's translated well from what's been going on in other offices, and what have they really struggled to introduce in Hong Kong. So sort of have a bit of a learning experience and very open to questions, and feel free to interrupt as we go along. So just to make sure, everybody here has got very impressive titles, so I want to make sure I get everybody right. So I'll start with Sylvain, who is head of HR at ROBECO, French, working for a Dutch company in Hong Kong, so some varied perspectives. And we were just joking outside, my husband's Dutch, so I was making sweeping generalisations about what it must be like to work at a Dutch company. And he's been working with ROBECO for about 18 months now. Yeah. But previously was in Hong Kong with AXA. So they're headquartered in the Netherlands, so a relatively small office comparatively here in Hong Kong, which obviously has its own challenges when you're trying to implement policies from headquarters. We then have Lynne Barry, who is head of global learning and development for Telstra. And I was quite amazed / horrified to see on her bio that she's responsible for 36,000 people globally for learning and development, and has over 20 years experience in various different countries. We then have Kimberly Arth. I'm really excited to be here. She's going to give us a sort of different perspective. Kimberly co-founded a company called Pivot earlier this year, which is specifically designed at trying to find project-based roles or short-term roles for women wanting to return to the workplace. So it's a recruitment company, but specialising in that area. And previously, Kimberly was in financial services industry herself. And then last but definitely not least, we have Liza from Accenture, who is Managing Director for Communications, Media and Technology. She's been in Hong Kong from Australia over 12 years and works across a variety, has a portfolio of very varied clients, and is also responsible for risk and quality, both of which are relevant to flexible working. So before we just jump in, I just wanted to obviously give a sense that flexible working, although personally for me it's got one particular meaning, it's not just about women coming back to work after maternity leave. It's about millennials wanting a different way of working. It's about people generally wanting a better work-life balance. And it's not just about part-time working or compressed hours. It can be about job sharing, working from home, having earlier start times or finish times. It can mean a range of things to different people. It can mean working on a consultancy basis. So just want to be clear that we want to try and cover the full parameter here, though, and I'll try and rein myself in from talking just about my own experiences of it. So just to jump in, Sylvain, do you want to just start talking about what your organisation has been doing and what's worked well or not worked well for you?
Thank you, Helen. And yes, I have to say that working in a Dutch company is very good. It's true that I've been, and it's very interesting actually as well in terms of culture, because I was working for a long time in a French company. Because ROBECO, so it's as you said, is asset management company, headquarters in Rotterdam, so big office in Rotterdam, but of course, smaller offices in Asia. So we have 6 locations in Asia. And I would say that the main point about flexible working is that flexible work is part of the culture of the company. I would say the main part of the culture is coming from the Dutch culture, but not only from this. But Uh, Talking about flexible working, I think, yes, it has to start with the culture and the mindset. Because once you have that, it's true that it's really helpful. The main difference is that in a big office like in Rotterdam, so we have a new building where people don't have their own desk anymore. So they arrive, they take one desk in the morning. We have very good technology because people can connect in any kind of rooms. You have a lot of meeting room, small room, big room. What we have, I think, so the second point beyond culture is about IT equipment. You know, we are like around 900 employees over the world. Each single employee has the same laptop, the iPhone, so whatever the level is. And we have new technology in terms of, I would say, security, but also access to any kind of driver, any kind of SharePoint, etc. Before it was more difficult. We all have a laptop and an iPhone, etc. But it was more difficult to connect to the global system. So here, what happened is that we all have the same equipment. First, if we go to any ROBECO office in the world, we don't have to check for the Wi-Fi password, etc. We just have to arrive. We go into a room. We connect our laptop to a cable, and then you have a screen. You can do VC like this. You can do presentation like this. So the flexibility, and that's my second point. It's about so you have the right tools, and I have to say that it makes a big difference because you can really be easy connected from everywhere, and I think the third point is about the communication. So the communication, because if you have to work on a flexible way, it is very important to have a very strong communication and sharing mode. So it is so in Rotterdam, big office, it's very well organized because also by law you can have flexibility for people to work from home 1 or 2 days a week. You have more flexible arrangement. In Asia, it's different because smaller offices mean that it's difficult to have people working from home when they want. It's difficult to have part-time because you need to have people in the office. In a small office, one person out of the office makes a difference. So I think what is important for us in Asia is that it's not that people can work from home or not, but they can manage their time the way they want. So for us, whether they arrive earlier in the office, later in the office, it's really part of the culture in that we are on the activity-based working. So if you deliver your work, that's okay. If you show that you're engaged, if you show that you're available, if you show that you deliver what you have to do, it is working. And I think that's really the most important thing for us. It's to work like this, and that's our culture.
So it sounds like it's somewhat informal in that people have the support and the systems to work in the way that works for them, but there isn't like a formal policy in place.
Yes, there is formal policy in Rotterdam because it's a bigger office, but when it's smaller offices, it's more informal. So that's why we rely a lot on the culture.
Okay. And I think, Lynne, you're coming from Telstra, that's obviously much bigger offices and organisation, but have got a very formal approach, a very structured approach. Yeah. And I think by the time you finished hearing what Lynne has to say, you're all going to go and want to work for Telstra, because I did when I heard about this, because I think it's amazing. But do you want to talk us through what you're doing and what the sort of challenges have been?
Sure. So in Telstra, we do have a formal policy which is called All Roles Flexible, and that's really flipping flexibility and saying every role in Telstra can be done flexibly. And if you're a people leader and someone asks you about flexibility and you'd like to decline that, it's the onus is on you to make a business case why you couldn't support flexibility. So we've really flipped that, and that's been really important in our organisation. So if you go onto our careers site, every role that we advertise anywhere in the world has a statement that this role can be done flexibly. And our policy does describe what flexibility could mean. So flexibility could mean working part-time, it could mean job sharing, it could mean having adjusted start and finish times, or it could mean working from alternative locations. What we found, though, is more people would like informal flexibility. So they would like to, in a given a day, week or month, be able to choose if they would like to, flex their hours based on their social life, based on their family life or other commitments. They may choose to start very early and leave early. They may choose to compress their work week in a given week and work 4 days, 4 long days and have a day off. So that's more appealing to most of our people, and they may choose to work from home when they feel like it or when their life wants them to, and they may not necessarily want to lock that in and stick to a schedule, and that's absolutely okay with us. The reason it works with us is because our values are incredibly important, and one of our values in Telstra is trust each other to deliver. So we assume with that policy that that level of trust is also assumed. I think the other reason it works really well for us is that we have we have a scorecard that our I'll call it a system, a process where all of our leaders, and that's cascaded a number of layers down into our organisation, describe their big goals, their sort of 3 to 5 year goals in their scorecard, and then for each quarter against each of those goals, they get really, really sharp about exactly what they're going to deliver in that quarter. So if I take me for an example, so I was leading the HR side of a large acquisition and integration over the last sort of 24 months. And so one of my big goals was I need to lead the people side of the PACnet integration. But then when I would get down to a quarterly basis, it would be, okay, this quarter I need to take care of Singapore and Malaysia and the harmonisation of their terms and conditions. So we get very, very tactically sharp. And what that enables and the way that enables and supports flexibility is that if you're contracting with your boss and you are so sharp about exactly what you're going to deliver against your big goals each quarter, then they don't care where you are. They don't care what hours of the day you're working. They just are going to hold you to account to deliver that. So if you have the trust and you have the clarity of what you need to deliver, to Sylvain's point, then I think flexibility can be a great enabler. But the one thing I would say that we learned as we implemented flexibility in Asia and Hong Kong was certainly concerned about this was, whilst the Australian mentality on flexibility was very relaxed about this informal side of things and that people can come and go, and frankly part of that perhaps also for Sylvain was driven by property. In Australia, Telstra has a lot of people, a lot of real estate space, and like every organisation you want to try and shrink that. And so for many companies that's led to or been a bit of a catalyst to what we call future ways of working in Telstra, where people don't have a desk, hardly anybody has an office, and you come into a workspace and you have different areas within the workspace where you can work flexibly. We're a little bit behind that in Asia. In some of our countries, in Philippines, we have that real estate set up. We don't quite have that in all of our other offices yet. So that catalyst wasn't quite there, where people sort of the circuit breaker of thinking my desk is the place I work, and so therefore if I'm not there, I'm not working. That hasn't quite happened in exactly the same way as it has in other countries, and certainly as it has in Australia and the Philippines. But the other thing we found with Asia is that our people leaders asked us for a few more rules, and they wanted a form for people to fill in, even if that was informal flexibility that they were looking for. And so we needed to enable that for the first few months, but then as people got used to it, and as people relaxed about it, and as we talked more about, no, this isn't about what someone's has to earn from you, this is our policy. that flexibility is available. If you need to write it down because you can't remember it, or if you need to write it down because that makes you feel more comfortable, knock yourself out. But it's not about a form so that you can approve it or not approve it. That it's got to be your starting point, that it's going to be okay. And of course, there's challenging roles. Yeah, we've heard all of that. But we will find ways to make it work, and we'll find ways to get creative with you.
And did you find culturally in Asia and in Hong Kong that there was more pushback against implementing the policy in the first place, or less take-up of people wanting to do it? Because from a personal level, when I came to Hong Kong, I was the first person in the office here to have asked for flexible working, and they weren't quite sure what to do with me and my newfangled crazy ideas that I'd brought over from the US and UK about, well, this is just normal, this is what people with small children do. And they were open to it, but they found it a bit surprising that I was asking. And just culturally, it seemed to be there's a lot more focus on FaceTime, and that people don't think flexible working works until they see it in practice and realise it can work.
Yeah.
So did you face that kind of challenge of either people not being reluctant at the top to implementing it, or people lower down just feeling like they didn't feel able to take up the opportunity?
Yeah. Well, people didn't have a choice about adopting it or not. You know, our CEO was incredibly clear about it, and every time he visited different locations, he would reinforce. He said, well, of course we have our all roles flex policy where every role can be done flexibly. So it wasn't an option for leaders to say, oh, I feel a little bit uncomfortable about it. I'm going to do it quietly. You know, I'll tick the box and say it's on the policy website, but then I'll pretend it's not there because it makes me feel a bit squeamish. So people didn't have a choice. I think there was a lot of power in that. But when we look at our statistics, across Asia, in Hong Kong, there's the same level of awareness of flexibility as there is in Australia. So that's in the high 80s, and there's very similar levels. Same in Hong Kong as Australia. When we ask the question, when you want to avail yourself of flexibility, are you being supported? And that's in the high 80s as well. In some of our countries, Japan, Korea, China, India, that's in the high 70s, so we're not where we want to be yet. They're smaller offices. We've got over 800 people in Hong Kong, so we've got some good scale here. Smaller offices can be a little bit more reluctant, and we all know that it's very different culturally in places like Japan and Korea, where FaceTime is more important, and that's a long game for us to change. But people had all these assumptions about flexibility in Hong Kong, that no one ever wants to work from home because their houses are too small. And that's not been my lived experience. And they had all these other assumptions like, well, only women care about flexibility, and that's not my lived experience either. So the men in my team take up flexibility in equal amounts to the women in my team. And actually a lot of people in my team choose to work from home either all the time or when it works for them. So I think we've helped to break down some of those stereotypes, but the power is in the policy and in the it is not negotiable for a leader to say I'm choosing to opt out of it with my team or my country.
Yeah. Thank you very much. See, I told you you'd all want to go and work for Telstra. Kimberly, we'll take a slightly different tack. Do you want to talk about kind of why you founded your company, Pivot, with Lauren, who's in the front row, trying to be quiet, but she's the other co-founder. Because obviously you saw a real gap in the market, specifically in Hong Kong, and kind of the attitudes and what you've been hearing about flexible working.
Right. So exactly that. I mean, we really felt that there was a gap in the market here for, I guess, two things. One, for women who wanted flexible work, and then also from companies who were willing to offer that, or were not really aware of the talent that they could get through these flexible work situations. And so, when Lauren and I initially talked about the concept of Pivot, we talked, it stemmed from our personal experiences, which was we were both very career-driven and had successful careers, but were put in situations when we relocated where we were removed from our networks, from our own career trajectories within the companies that we had spent a lot of time with. So, starting over again, the question was, what is going to work and what do our lives look like now? And so it was really about, in a transitional point of life, which is very consistent for many women, whether it's having children or being relocated, what are the options for careers and what does the landscape look like in Hong Kong? And for us, we felt like there was very limited options because from personally, the full-time option, as much as I had done it up until the point where we moved out here, wasn't working, just for the point that we had moved here and the network that we had didn't exist anymore. And so as we started having these conversations, we realized this resonates over and over and over again. So how many times have you met somebody who's a mother who was, you see her as a mother now, but, actually she was a lawyer or she had a PhD, and what is she doing? Well, she feels that there's no option for her to do something that could be more manageable within her life experience. And so that was the premise for Pivot and for bringing both ends of the spectrum together. And I mean, when we started, we had a notion of how deep the talent pool could be. And I think we've been overly impressed, even more so, with how it's panned out, because we have a talent base that is comprised of women that have over 10 years of experience, where they've left, very successful careers. 40% of our talent base speaks multiple languages, and, we have people who have master's degrees. And so what you're seeing is that there is this group of people that is kind of invisible in some ways to the traditional talent networks because of the fact they are not full-time. So companies are essentially missing out on these great perspectives, because a lot of these women too have worked globally. So there's global perspectives, there's just experienced perspectives that are essentially being excluded. So we really want to bridge that gap.
And what kind of messages are you hearing from the companies that you speak to about, have they been more or less open than you thought they would be to tapping into this workforce? Have they recognised it as an amazing opportunity and untapped asset, or are they sort of like, oh, well, we don't really want to take on project-based or part-time? What kind of things have you been hearing?
I mean, it runs the gamut. So on one end of the spectrum, we've walked into meetings where, people looked at us and said, oh, contract-based work, this is really unique. And we're like, this is not a unique idea. It's just maybe, it's not fully ingrained in the culture. On the other end of the spectrum, we've walked into meetings with multinational companies that said, this is amazing, we want to make this work, we know exactly how we would implement this in our business lines, and we think this can be of real value. So I think, there's a level of education when we're out pitching this, and then there's another level of, okay, we see the vision, let's work on how we can implement this in an effective way.
Okay. So Lisa, do you want to talk about what's going on in Accenture and sort of globally, and how that's been implemented in Hong Kong and how it's gone well or not gone well?
Yeah, sure. So as Helen mentioned, I'm leading the communications, media and technology space for Accenture based in Hong Kong. Our organisation is a very large organisation, so we've got over 370,000 people globally. We operate in 120 countries, and we have a really diverse range of services, everything from sort of traditional strategy and management consulting through to technology and back office outsourcing, and more recently an entirely new business in the area of digital, which has an entirely different workforce as well. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit was, some of the things that we've worked on. Obviously, as a global company, some global programs are more fully executed in certain geographies than others. And I think overall, whilst we're quite proud of the flexibility and initiatives that we have put in place, certainly we're not there yet in every country and every geography and every market. Couple of examples that I wanted to mention. So the first one is what we call our Go Flex program. So that's really sort of branded to our employees as finding your flex or finding your flexibility. So given the range of clients that we work with, often our people are staffed. Sometimes it's short term or sometimes it's long term on large projects with our clients. So we have a program which can be sponsored by the senior executives that are running those particular engagements to really ensure that flexibility is built into that particular project in a way that makes sense given the objectives, timeline, scope of the program. I'd say the number one priority within that Find Your Flex concept is the concept around remote working. We try not to make it, too specific or too policy driven, but we enable those teams with, everything from templates around, standard emails, standard presentations, standard processes, a standard timeline if you want to actually implement that particular program on your project. And there's specific actions as well around having the leaders on those projects and programs. So it comes really from the top of the engagement to themselves, put together a profile and do communication direct to the employees around what Find Your Flex actually means to them as a leader. So, at different life stages, as we've mentioned, it could be driven around some of your children's activities. It could be, if you're a male and you've got certain activities that you want to, participate in at certain times of the week, using sort of somewhat stereotyped ones, but soccer training or any sort of other activities. We encourage that to be, put out there and communicated directly to those project teams so that they know from the outset that the leaders themselves are embracing Find Your Flex, not necessarily because they're having to do it, but because they also are individuals and they have, goals, objectives around their own personal lives together with their career aspirations as well. The other concept is around basically, connectivity and enabling everyone to technically be able to go remote, right? So obviously if you don't have the technology and the infrastructure in place, if it's not physically possible for people to join the conference calls they need to collaborate in the way they need to, then, it's basically going to break down at those points. So it's very, very important. We find that the collaboration aspect, the enablement, is part of that plan of executing. So just to give you one example, we do invest in those technologies. So we have a digital studio. In fact, it was just officially launched yesterday in Hong Kong out at One Island East. And some amazing technologies in place there. So there's just things like collaboration spaces, so not meeting rooms anymore, collaboration spaces. They have interactive whiteboards. So if we have a project team which is serving multiple locations, which quite often is the case across Asia and even into other countries as well, they can interact, they can have an iPad, you can be standing there doing the presentation or the collaboration, you can be interacting on the whiteboard. That whiteboard is shared down to, let's say, Sydney, for example, where there's also one of our other networks of the studios. You can make changes on the iPad, that's reflected there, that's getting down, down to Sydney, and the team are actually collaborating together. So it becomes, because the technology is there, that is what people will use, right? They won't ignore that and go back to the old way, well, let me, just email you the PowerPoint presentation later and, if you could send me some comments back by email in, a day's time, and then we'll have a conference call and then we'll iterate it. We're trying through technology enablement, connectivity, and pushing really the messages from the people and leadership side that this is actually how we work now, this is how we do projects, and actually we're bringing our clients into that space as well. So whilst that might seem, a little bit foreign to the very traditional type of companies, we're finding our clients are actually loving that experience as well, and it's in turn helping them to, promote in their own organisations a different way of collaboration and working. So, as I said, by all means, that's sort of not something fully implemented in every country and every place, but it's something that we're finding is getting great take-up. Millennials, we have, I think we've got around 70% of our workforce of that population is millennials, and they just adapt to that far quicker than probably what my generation and the others do, but. That becomes the way of working. It's all about collaboration. It's all about bringing together people through technology and providing everyone the ability to go remote if they choose to, and being able to connect those dots across different countries and different places. A couple of other areas. I mean, there's a range of programs really, but we also try and promote it through some of our women's initiatives in particular, because we do find that it does lend itself to addressing some of the challenges we have around, retention and women's programs in particular. So we do, once a year, we have International Women's Day as another example. In Greater China, we rotate the physical conduct of International Women's Day across the city, so it will rotate through Dalian 1 year, to Shanghai, to Beijing, to Hong Kong, to Chengdu. And then we do a range of sort of global and local programs around that International Women's Day for the full day. So again, sort of connected through technology, those officers will collaborate kind of round the sun type environment, all the way through from Asia to North America to Europe. So there's a range of global speakers, there's a range of development programs that go around that. So this year we focused around your digital persona. What is it that, as a female in particular, around your social media persona, how do you make that kind of your own personal brand? Given the range of social media and digital take-up in countries like China, it's not obviously it's not traditional things like Facebook and others that operate. So how can we have our women actually have a persona in the digital world that makes sense to them as a person within our company? So sort of a range of activities, workshops, speakers, engagement, and then that, again, same sort of theme around digital, around collaboration, around technology, enabling it. And promotion through leadership, talking, and not saying this is what they're going to do, but just saying this is actually how we work now. This is how our teams will operate. This is what I do personally, and continuing to try and push that through.
Okay. One thing I hear a lot in my role professionally is from companies who are being asked by one of their employees for flexible working, and the employer will come back to me with a whole list of reasons why it just can't possibly work. And so the kind of things that I hear over and over again are they're in a client-facing role, or they need to be present to build, relationships within the team, or if I say yes to one person, then everybody's going to want it and it's not going to be workable. So it'd be just quite interesting if any of you've got a perspective on that, and obviously, Sylvain, you'll have a different perspective because you probably actually think some of those things are actually true for your office here, that you think, well, actually, I'm not sure I would want everybody working part-time, whereas obviously Telstra has a different view on it. But if any of you've got a view on how you have addressed some of the difficulties that people, or the perceptions people have about whether flexible working can or can't work, because I think certainly for some of my clients, I think, well, yeah, I like the idea of flexible working, but it doesn't work for my company. So it'd be just interesting if any of you've got a perspective on that.
So I think the first thing I would say is technology is everybody's friend, and the sort of technology that I use across virtual teams, that I'm sure most of us do, have are video enabled. You can share files live. So there's really no technical reason why working in different locations, including working from home, can't work anymore. And most organisations have been investing in that technology. So I think we can cross that one out now for most of us. I think you have to get really, really curious about why something can't work, and why would it be the worst thing that could happen if everybody was working flexibly, if that meant that you had a more loyal and engaged and productive workforce. So I think you have to sort of flip it around to think the sky's not falling because you've got some spare seats in your office. That's not the definition of bad. The sky should be falling if you're not productive and if you're not getting the outcomes that you need. And when we know in Telstra that the people that avail themselves of flexibility are more engaged and stay in our organisation longer, that's the kind of outcome that you're looking for. So why wouldn't you be promoting flexibility and wanting people to work flexibly if they want to? And that's the really important thing, is it's if you want to, and it's flexibility by your personal definition, not by someone else's.
Sylvain, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Because obviously you're coming from a smaller office where you feel probably the practical impacts.
Yeah, I think first it depends also on the role, because of course even in our company and even in a bigger office, like the head office. Some roles, it's not, you can't be flexible. When you are working on the market, when you are a trader, for example, there are some specific working times, so you can't do for everything. I think the point about your question, it's also about management, because although we have this flexibility culture in the company, we have, depending on the location, and especially in Asia, and you mentioned, Lynne, about also Japan or Korea, and of course that's where it's probably more difficult, because it's typically the kind of area where people will say, it's nice, but for us it doesn't work. But I think it relies a lot on the management, because we got some examples where, for example, here in Hong Kong, where some managers were saying, we are more on, I have to see people at 9 in the morning, I have to see people, and if I don't see them, there is an issue. And it's a kind of, I would say, old-fashioned way of managing people, but it still does exist, it's still difficult. And I think that it comes to a point about trust, because what is interesting is that in your company you put that trust is a no-brainer, but trust is also something you have to gain, you have to build as well, and sometimes you can lose. And that's very interesting, because I would say in your company everything is very formalized about flexibility, about trust, where I would say trust is a key part of flexibility, but in ROBECO it's more about informal, it's more about how you build trust, and I would say that the culture of the company is that people in general trust that when a new joiner is arriving, this person has been recruited for a reason, so this person will bring something, so we trust that. But what happens if the trust is lost? And I don't know how you manage that about trust to deliver, but if there is no delivery, or if there is an issue in terms of trust.
So we still have a business to run. We get that, and if people aren't delivering, then we deal with that. And are they not delivering because they're not capable of delivering, because their goals weren't set at an appropriate level, or was it because they were taking advantage of flexibility? We've not really found yet any evidence that anyone has taken advantage of flexibility. We find the opposite. If people are given flexibility and it's really important to them personally, they work harder and they are much more productive and loyal to you as a company. So those fears don't really exist. I'm sure they're in some people's heads. It's a long game, as I said, in some countries. But I mean, cultures change, company cultures change, and country cultures change. 20 years ago, not many of us had any senior women in leadership roles in Japan or Korea or some other countries. Now we do. So I don't accept that there's a view that it can never change in some of those more traditional cultures. I think it just takes a little bit longer, and you need your leaders to be brave enough to walk out the door and say, go home before I go home, or be brave enough to say, I'm going home now because I would like to spend time with my family, and as long as you get your work done, I really don't care where you are. We just need some of those circuit breakers to happen.
Liza, what have you been doing within Accenture to kind of address some of those trust issues? Because certainly, as a lawyer, I have to account for every 6 minutes of my time, which until I did part-time working, I found utterly miserable. But now I do part-time working, it's become my friend, because I can objectively prove that I'm still doing the same amount of work or still adding value, and it's a very clean-cut measure of whether I'm doing my job or not, or taking advantage, which I think addressed a lot of the early concerns that I faced here in Hong Kong about whether flexible working worked. And you mentioned that in Telstra you try and have very specific targets, so that very honed-in targets, more than you would normally have, so that you can see whether people are doing what they need to be doing. Have you adopted anything different or sort of similar within Accenture to kind of assess to address the concerns about whether people are working, notwithstanding the fact it's flexible?
I think it's the first principle is flexibility. It's somewhat individual, and I think you have to have, as a principle, it has to work for the business and for that person in the role. I mean, if someone's personal definition of flexibility is, they want to do, soccer in the middle of the day and they've got a high-touch client role where that clearly isn't going to work, there's no point to implement things that are on the boundary or which are going to ultimately hurt the business and ultimately make it fail. So I think the key to it, though, is the framework has got to be there, and then the details need to be worked out, I think, according to the to the person's role and the requirements, and they have to, in return, also be flexible in other respects, such that if there is something that does come up, the deadline or the client demand or something is changed or is excessive, they may have to have some flexibility around this as well. It's not always a one-way street of, okay, I've defined my flexibility and, I'm not going to move on that because, in the end, you're going to break trust, you're going to cause damage to the business. That's just going to make the entire program to break down. So I think, as a principle, it has to work for the business. If that person's expectations is way out of line with what really can work, then, it shouldn't be implemented in those type of cases, or a different option should be looked at.
And you touched on retention, which I think is actually a very important issue. I saw some research a couple of weeks ago by a company like Kellogg's, and they were talking about women, and it was focusing on women, but I think this applies generally, who have got a flexibility in their current role are less likely to move to another company because they're worried about whether they'll be able to get it there, and they're worried about asking for it, because most roles aren't advertised as being potential for flexible working. And they don't want to ask in case they get kind of ruled out of the selection process. So they think, I'll go and work there for a year, and once I've proved myself, then I'll see if I can do it flexibly. So Kimberly, I just wanted to get your thoughts on kind of what you're hearing from women about their experiences and whether they're felt put off from even applying for roles and how they've broached the subject with companies.
Well, I think generally there's something missing as far as having the conversation of flexibility just generally in companies. And so I think it's not something that is at the surface, something that women feel exists. So there's a lot of apprehension about approaching managers about what their options could be as far as flexibility could mean. And I mean, I've spoken to people who have specifically said, I was thinking about it to be proactive about, coming back from maternity or whatever the case may be. I went proactively to my manager, and they said, you know what, we don't do flexibility, and that's something you're just going to have to work out. And so I think there has to be a shift in attitudes on that front and a willingness to have openness around what does flexibility mean for you as an individual. Because, by the way, flexibility could just mean that they start an hour earlier and end an hour earlier. It doesn't mean that they don't want to be at work. And how can we make that work for you, for the individual? Because I think that leads to a much bigger and positive outcome as far as retention goes, because you've already put the investment into your employees. If you can tailor make to some small degree an effort to provide flexibility, then you may be able to retain that employee. And so maybe for a year they're not at 100%, maybe they're at 85%, but then going forward they're now completely loyal because they feel that you've done something for them, and then you've already you've put them back on their career path, so you're not finding a replacement for that person as well. So that's our general sentiment.
And Lynne, presumably at Telstra you advertise when externally that roles have this, all roles flex approach. And I don't know if you do the same, Liza, Sylvain, I don't know whether you do it, but the research was saying how few companies will advertise that a role can be done flexibly and how that potentially is putting people off. But it'd be interesting to hear from Liza and Sylvain about whether you do proactively, when you're advertising externally, say whether a role can be done flexibly or not, or whether it's you wait for a conversation to be brought up.
Actually, we don't. When we advertise, we don't talk about flexibility. It's more a discussion with a candidate. Yes, it's not. something we put in front. Maybe again because for us flexibility it's maybe more informal, and it has to be depending on the role and depending on the constraints of the individual of the candidate, for example. We can also be flexible on this. So if we have a good candidate but who needs a bit more flexibility, I think we will try to find a solution, but we don't put that up front now.
Have I persuaded you that you should?
Maybe.
I think that's a good point, because for us that's a talent differentiator. And you know, in 2011, 2012, Telstra was not attracting as diverse talent as we wanted to, especially we weren't attracting the women that we wanted to attract. And by moving into an all roles flex policy and advertising every role flexibly, that has changed substantially for us. So we have a much higher percentage of diverse candidates, especially women, applying for roles now. And that's healthy competition that we want to have. We want the best talent and the most diverse talent. And if that gives us a leg up against other companies, that's great. But equally, if everybody was doing it, that would also be the right thing for the talent in our communities. Just the one other thing I would say, Helen, to some points that I've heard is I think often we hear, especially if people are embedded in customers or clients, saying our customers and clients won't like flexibility, so we're not going to bring it up. And so my response to that is, when you ask them if they would be comfortable with it, what was their response? Almost 100% of the time, people say, I actually haven't asked them yet. I've just assumed that. So you have to be pushy on those things, I really think. Because if you said to a client, I'm giving you the best person for this role out of the team, and if they do want to play soccer in the middle of the day, they're going to come in really early, they're going to stay late, but that's really important to them. It's the best person for this role, so is that going to be okay with you? That's pretty hard to say no to. So I think we have to get a little bit pushy, for those of us that are allowed to be pushy, and a little bit creative about, requiring that conversation to actually happen, rather than continue to think maybe there's barriers that might not quite be there.
Yeah, just in terms of recruitment, I don't believe we do advertise that it is a flexible role, unless there'd be a sort of specific requirement, unfortunately. But I think what we do try to do is at least ensure that people that are looking to join the organisation are aware of our brand positioning as an employer of choice in the various different locations, are aware that there's a policy exists, are aware that within the constraints of different roles, there are the ability to explore different flexible work options. But at least in this region, which is where I am most familiar, I don't think we've progressed as far that we do really say that every role is flexible.
Okay, one other thing I'd be interested to hear about is that obviously you can have policies tucked away in a handbook somewhere, and tick the box that you are into flexibility. But unless the policy is being not only implemented but bought into at the very top, by which I mean people at the very top doing flexible working themselves, it's hard to encourage people lower down the food chain to be brave enough to do it. Have you had much take up at the senior levels, and has that made a big difference, do you think?
So I would say yes. Our CEO, who used to be our CFO, his flexibility remains that he takes a chunk of time out of the middle of the day, not always every day, but at the middle of the day to go to the gym. And he had to contract with the previous CEO about that and said, that's the way I need to work my day, that in the middle of the day I need an energy boost, and so that's what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to be available for these hours. So that's a pretty good role model. I work flexibly. I start very early in the morning, and I am one of the first people. I am out the door at 5 o'clock every afternoon. So I start at 6:30. People see me walking out the door, I make a big deal of it. I don't do the walk of shame where I sort of go there and then I go there and then I sort of look like I might be going to the bathroom, but I'm not going to the bathroom. I make a big deal of it. I say goodbye to everyone. Everybody knows you cannot get into my calendar after 5 o'clock. You can speak to me while I'm on the ferry on the way home, but I shout it out loud and proud. And I think the more people do that, and many of our executives in Hong Kong and Australia are actually doing the same thing. So I choose, for me, to leave home very early in the morning before anyone's up, but I choose to be home so I can have dinner with my son and do the homework and do the reading the stories at night. And I tell everybody that. So I think the more that you can tell everybody that and they see those role models, the more it's okay, and they see that it's also not just for senior people who can get away with it, but it's also, we talk about it in our teams. And the one thing we do is on our social media site, so we prefer to communicate via Yammer rather than via email. We publish stories about men using flexibility more than any other stories, because that's got to be more acceptable. So the finance lead in China working from home, photos of that and a story about why that's important to him. Another man in Japan choosing to work flexible hours so that he can have some family time and some commitment to sport time. That's really important. So telling those stories, especially of men, has worked well for us.
So before we kind of open up to questions, could you all each just give kind of one takeaway, either lesson that you've learned from what your organisation is doing or where you think it could be doing better, or kind of, Kimberly, one message that you'd like HR people to take away about how to try and address it within their companies?
Sure. I guess personally, I think that the takeaway is just to be more open to the dialogue and to not think narrowly about what flexibility means and only the negatives, because I think essentially our company is almost a case study in what happens when you're not open to flexibility, because we have so many women that are opted out of the workforce because they didn't think it was something that was available to them. So unfortunately, this is a situation now, but I think if you can create a dialogue of flexibility that's acceptable currently, you're going to reflect that back to your younger colleagues and teammates, and I think that promotes a better future of retainment and overall success of the companies.
Yeah, just quickly, I think from my perspective, I think the key is also to link it to whatever the business outcome is. I mean, as I said, we haven't got it right, and we certainly haven't got it right in every country, although we're I think moving in the right direction in many areas. But where you have a challenge, such as retention, for instance, we do have a challenge in that middle layer. In particular, when you look at the statistics over time, there's definitely some points which typically women do choose to exit a consulting career. If you can tie some of these things to some of those things which are actually really pain points in the business, you'll start to get a lot more traction. You'll start to get senior sponsors that do see this as something important to address, and then you'll get support and buy-in for the programs that can really make a difference in this, and track the data as well. I mean, some of these programs do deliver real changes in those metrics around, attraction or retention or the I&D metrics that everyone is chasing. So
have you
it's
seen,
worth to do it.
A significant change in sort of the data in terms of before and after introducing the scheme, like in terms of your retention rates? Or
Yeah, look, we've still got work absolutely to do. So, as I said, certainly in that middle layer, I don't think we've cracked the answer, because there is a lot of challenge around work hours, around travel, around the demands of the job. But I think we do actually measure these things. The data does come out every month, so we can certainly see the trend lines. We can certainly share with people, where we are making improvements, where we're getting, challenges in certain countries. And once you get those data points out, then the discussions become, we're not just doing this because it's a good thing to do. It's actually, we're doing this because in country X, Y, Z, if we don't do this, we're, really starting to, have dents on our business results. Yeah.
Lynne, what about you? What would be your kind of takeaway lesson of learning?
I think that the big takeaway is if you're not making flexibility available and pervasive in your organisation, it's going to catch up with you pretty quickly. I think especially if you're trying to target graduate talent, but if you want an inclusive and diverse workforce, they want flexibility, and you're just not going to be able to keep up with your talent competitors, the other companies that are trying to get the same shallow pool, if you're not going to make that available. So I would say start now, even if you're starting small and you're in the long game as well. Start now.
Yeah, for me, first, of course, I will advertise more about flexibility in the opening.
He's regretting sitting next to me.
Yeah, exactly. So, no, I think the point it's about maybe become a bit more formal, and that's very interesting because I think again the culture is very important. So it has to start with the mindset and the culture of the company. But at some point, I think it's a no-brainer, so it has to be even more pushed. And when for some managers, some people still resist a bit, we have to push it. It has to be part of really the culture and the DNA of the company.
So has anyone got any questions or anything they want to talk about in terms of challenges their own organisation has faced or personally that you faced, or any questions for any of the panellists about what their company is doing? Otherwise, I'm just going to keep bombarding them with questions and bullying Sylvain into doing things he doesn't want to do.
Hi, I'm Ruby Lam from HK USD. I work with fresh graduates who are joining your companies. One of the things that we find is that a lot of young people these days, they would much prefer freelancing, and perhaps freelancing in multiple companies at the same time, and perhaps actually not just in one area, but freelancing in multiple areas at the same time at multiple companies. They want to do everything at the same time at multiple places. And they want to take charge of their own careers, and so they want to basically just do project work at all their clients instead of become an employee. Are you ready for that? Or are you open for it? Open to this idea, or have you ever considered or thought about that?
So yeah, I think Telstra is ready for that. I think and has that. There's a large contracting or freelance workforce, especially in Australia, that works for Telstra. I think there are some things where you can't have everything. So you can't be freelancing for Telstra and freelancing for Optus and freelancing for Vodafone at the same time. That's not going to work for us. But certainly. We shape work sometimes on a project basis, not just on a role basis. And when it's a project basis, we bring in freelancers or contract with freelance organisations. I think that in the Western countries, that freelance part of the talent pool pie is growing faster than certainly I see it growing in Asia. But if that's the sentiment on campus and we want the best talent from campus, then we need to be able to adjust the ways that we shape work in our organisation so that we can still get that talent. It's just going to be in a slightly different way than we have done so historically.
I think we had another question.
Go ladies first.
A question. I'm Jenny Pong from Jardine Technology Holdings. From my perspective, because we are trying, it's a 60-year-old IT company, very, very traditional, and we are now trying to get, trying to get the buy-in from the BU. The first step that we did is to tell them that, okay, we should be providing the flexibility working environment, at least for your top performing people. So I hear you, Lynne, that it's a policy for everyone, everywhere, whatever job. And I also hear you, Liza, that, from a business perspective, yeah? And I also hear you that, from a culture standpoint. But if we want to, really step, at least having the baby step onto this journey, we need to have an anchor point, right? That people need to see some examples to build their confidence and their trust. And we're trying to say, okay, let's look at the past performance of those individuals. I mean, they've been gaining your A's and B's in your performance assessment in your last year or two. Those are, I mean, your trusted employees, and they've been, I mean, here for quite some time. And this is the family situation change or whatever that we should grant those for those individuals. I don't know. I mean, how you guys see it. From your perspective, or are you thinking about, say, Jenny Pong, you're too old-fashioned about this, you should just, I mean, open the gate and just do it all in one go? Or, I mean, how
I think you know better than any of us what's going to work in your organisation and what your culture's ready for. I think if your culture values and showcases high performance, and you think that is an easy entry point to demonstrate that flexibility can work for obviously the people that have got the most on their plate and that are the most productive. If that's going to work for you, Jenny, that's the great way to start. You know that best. I think one thing that I've found is people have been asking me to. External colleagues have asked me to come in and talk within their organisation to their business leaders about what we do. So I would say lean on your colleagues that are doing things in their organisation, and especially if you can find a male business leader that has had success in flexibility in their workforce to come and talk to perhaps your male leadership if they are men. I found that can be a really helpful strategy, so that again they just bit by bit that they can open their mind to it not being a productivity challenge and something that can work for everyone.
Yeah, baby steps might as well mean, rather than limiting the pool of people that you open it to, opening up to everybody, but in a flexibility having a narrower meaning, at least to start with, that people can't necessarily do a 3-day week or work a day a week from home, but that they can vary their working hours each day, or that they can pick half a day to work from home. Or so it might be starting with flexibility in a more controlled and narrow definition, and then but for everybody, so that you get a higher take up and you can see that it's working, and then gradually expand what flexibility means. That might be the other way of doing it, because my concern about narrowing the group of people is you create a perception that it's something that has to be earned, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but that's a perception that you're creating. And you might also, the high performers might feel then a level of pressure that they're the test case and they've got to make this work, and they'll then be working on their day off to make sure that it's not seen that they're opting out or that they're writing off their career by taking it up. So I think self-selecting the group of people that you open it up to may not be the best group of people. They may not be the people who want flexibility the most or who need it the most. They might not be the people who are best at shutting off and actually properly just doing a 4-day week or whatever it is that you're offering. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think you'll have to think about it for your organisation, but it might be better to start with a bigger group of people but a smaller definition of what's permitted as flexible or not.
Thank you. Robin Ball from MDS. This is all very interesting. I'm challenged now because I've only got 2 offices of 12 people in each. You would think it was fairly easy to get this sort of thing started. And some of the problems are just not to do with my inflexibility at all. What we've found is that when certain people take flexi working arrangements, other people who have chosen not to get resentful about it. Mm-hmm. So and similar sorts of problems. So it causes me to think back, is there something else we should be doing as a preparation, before we launch into what is obviously a big deal for many people? Are there some essential preparations we need to do around the culture, which you mentioned several times? Did Telstra have a building block? Going back a few years. Did you have building blocks?
I think because we went out with a big bang, led from our CEO.
So no building block.
There wasn't a worry about resentment because everybody knew it was available to them. So it wasn't that I was the chosen one to be able to start and end my workday differently. Everybody had that available, and so therefore, it was about what do you want and how do we make it work. I was with a colleague from one of the banks the other day, and what he was talking about, because we were talking about flexibility, is when you're doing it early in the early days, you might need to be really overt with your team, especially if you've got two officers of 12, to say, let's just gather and understand who's utilising flexibility and how they're utilising it this week. Let's make sure that we contract with each other to know that if anyone's feeling that means they've got to pick something up that the other person would pick up, that we understand how we're going to manage that workload, and let's just get it out there and see if anyone's got any concerns about it. So I think at your point of maturity, if you need to have team discussions about flexibility in an intact team or an intact office, then that can also mean that people don't need to wallow in resentment because it's unspoken or because it's an advantage that they've got. And from his perspective, he does that with his team every week. Because people choose different flexibility in his team every week. So it's so-and-so's working from Japan this week because they're staying with their parents for another week. Someone's doing something else. Is everyone going to be okay with that? And that's how they contract with each other every week.
I think transparency is very important as well, because I certainly felt when I first started my flexible working, I'm out the door at 6. It's pretty non-negotiable unless I have a client literally on fire, I'm out the door at 6. And I have 2 hours where I go home, I read stories, I throw the kids in the bath, I throw them in bed, and then I log on and I work from 8 to 11 if I need to. And I think it was quite helpful for other people in the team to know that that's what I was doing. Not that I was finishing my working day at 6 while they were still slogging it out in the office, but that I was taking a 2-hour window where I wouldn't be available. But then guess what? While you're all down the pub in Lan Kwai Fong, I'm working from 8 to 11. So
what happened? You sent an email out at 8 saying, I'm back online, and you made sure everybody got an email at 11.
Tactical timing of emails, no. But I made people know, I'm leaving the office at 6, and generally, unless you really need to contact me, I'm not massively available for a conference call unless it really has to happen. But then you can call me from 8 o'clock onwards. So I think people knowing that that's what I'm doing does address some of the resentment that they don't think that I'm just finishing my working day at 6.
Thank you. I think what I'm picking up as well is that it's not just about flexi working in different aspects of that, it's about a whole new set of relationships with people in the workplace, isn't it? And it's going to take a bit of time to do this. I mean, we talked about Hong Kong, and do people really want to work from Hong Kong homes? And none of my team would, I think, is the fast answer. In fact, it's the other way around. I turn up on a Saturday, and there are 3 people in the office, and I say, it's really good of you to turn up on a Saturday. What do you do? And the answer is they're doing their work for their master's program, or they're doing something else with brought their grandchild in or something. Because the office is the only place they've got where there's a bit of freedom and a bit of space. Yeah. So I think there's a generational thing going on, I reckon, with Hong Kong.
Can I ask a question to Kimberly? I'm interested to know, I mean, the demographics of the database that you have, i.e. the candidates that you have on hand. I mean, male, female proportion, expats versus local Hong Kong proportion?
Right. So we're basically 100% female. I guess from expat to local, I would say it's probably 90% expat. So, I mean, a lot of people who have relocated and, are looking to, either take up new work or have had children within a relocation where they want to get back into the workforce.
Any final burning thoughts or questions? I think we're actually going to finish on time. 4 minutes early. Can buddy Sylvain some more. So as we just got 4 minutes, I'll just keep asking questions. So I could talk about this all day. Oh, you have a question?
Hi, I'm Lauren with Pivot. Lynne, so just maybe this is a good wrap-up question, actually. So you mentioned a few of the positive aspects of having a flexible work environment, retention, anything else that just for an individual or a person within an organization, the positive points of having the flexibility that you have found as an organization to kind of sell this idea to somebody else or to a company?
So retention, absolutely. Attraction, absolutely. People are more attracted to us because of that policy. I think the environment is different. When you have flexibility, you do have an environment of trust. And when people feel that they're treated like a grown-up at work, and that you you're working to outcomes rather than to presenteeism, I think that makes a difference to them personally and to the pride that they feel in the organisation that they work with and for. I think the other benefit for us is, I think for both men and women, and especially showcasing flexibility for men, it feels like it's also driving more of an inclusive culture. That men are okay to say, I want flexibility too. We've gone beyond it being a question mark over your head about your level of commitment to the organisation because you want flexibility. Men feeling more comfortable and secure in asking for flexibility for their own parental responsibilities or other things, I think just feels different in the organisation now, and it feels like we're more inclusive as a result of being able to make that available to everyone and showcase the real differences of the way people want to take it up.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. I have a small gift for everybody. I've already told them I've got no idea what it is. So if it's good, I'll take credit, and if it's not, I won't. But thank you very much to all of our panellists for today. So I think now comes the good stuff. It's lunch. So back in the main room where the start notes.